The marble floors of the downtown courthouse echoed with the sharp click of expensive Italian leather shoes as Marcus Chin strode through the corridors, his perfectly tailored charcoal suit reflecting the morning sunlight streaming through towering windows. His confidence radiated from every calculated step, the kind of arrogance that comes from a man who believes he has already won before the battle has even begun. Behind him trailed his legal team, 3 attorneys from the city's most prestigious firm, their briefcases bulging with documents that Marcus was certain would paint him as the brilliant entrepreneur who had built an empire from nothing. As you watch this story unfold, I'm curious where you're tuning in from today. Whether you're watching from your home office, during a lunch break, or maybe even from a courthouse waiting room yourself. This tale of hidden truths and financial deception is about to reveal just how wrong our assumptions about people can be. Drop a comment and let me know what state or country you're watching from. Marcus pushed through the heavy courtroom doors with the swagger of a tech mogul who had graced the covers of business magazines, his salt and pepper hair immaculately styled, his $5,000 watch catching the light as he gestured dismissively toward the woman already seated at the defendant's table. Elena Vasquez sat quietly in a simple navy dress that looked like it came from a department store clearance rack, her dark hair pulled back in a modest bun, her hands folded in her lap, like a schoolgirl waiting for punishment. To anyone observing the scene, the contrast could not have been more stark. Here was the successful businessman facing off against what appeared to be a woman who had spent her entire adult life dependent on his generosity. Elena kept her eyes downcast as Marcus took his place at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by his army of legal representation while she sat with just one attorney, a middle-aged woman in a worn suit, who looked like she handled small claims cases rather than high-stakes divorce proceedings. The courtroom began filling with spectators, business associates of Marcus who had come to witness what they assumed would be a routine dissolution of marriage between a self-made millionaire and his housewife. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom with the gravity befitting someone who had overseen thousands of divorce cases, her gray hair pinned back severely, her black robes flowing as she took her seat behind the bench. The bailiff called the proceedings to order, and the theater of Marcus Chin's carefully constructed narrative was about to begin. Marcus's lead attorney, James Wellington, rose from his chair with the smooth confidence of a man who charged $800 an hour. His opening statement painted a picture that seemed almost cartoonish in its simplicity. Here was Marcus Chin, a visionary entrepreneur who had started with nothing more than a computer in his garage and built a technology empire worth $47 million through sheer determination and innovative thinking. On the other side sat Elena, a woman who had contributed nothing to their marriage except an endless stream of expenses and demands. Wellington gestured toward Elena with barely concealed disdain as he explained to Judge Hendricks that this woman had never held a job, never earned a single dollar of income, and had spent their entire 15-year marriage living off the fruits of Marcus's labor. She had played house while he worked 18-hour days building the company that would eventually employ over 200 people and revolutionize data analytics for small businesses across the country. Marcus nodded approvingly at every word, occasionally leaning over to whisper corrections or additions to Wellington's presentation. His confidence was infectious, spreading to the spectators who murmured their approval at this clear-cut case of a hard-working man finally freeing himself from a parasitic relationship. Even some of the court staff seemed to view Elena with a mixture of pity and judgment. This middle-aged woman, who had apparently coasted through life without ever developing the skills or ambition to support herself. The narrative continued with Wellington producing Marcus's tax returns, showing a steady climb from modest beginnings to astronomical success. Every year marked another milestone, another breakthrough product, another expansion into new markets. The documentation painted Marcus as a modern Horatio Alger story, a testament to American entrepreneurship and the rewards that come to those willing to sacrifice everything for their vision. Elena's attorney, Rebecca Santos, sat quietly taking notes, occasionally glancing at her client who remained perfectly still throughout Wellington's performance. Santos looked overmatched and underprepared, her legal pad containing only scattered observations while Wellington commanded the courtroom with charts and graphs showing Marcus's company's meteoric rise. Marcus himself took the stand next, his testimony delivered with the polished presentation skills that had won him contracts with Fortune 500 companies. He described the early days of struggling to get his startup off the ground, while Elena complained about their modest apartment and demanded they move to more expensive neighborhoods. He painted himself as the sole creative force behind every innovation, every strategic decision, every breakthrough that had led to their current success. He told Judge Hendricks about the countless nights he had worked while Elena watched television, the weekends he had spent coding while she went shopping with friends, the vacations she had demanded while he worried about making payroll. His voice carried the weariness of a man who had carried an unfair burden for too long, a successful entrepreneur who had been generous enough to support someone who had never shown the initiative to support herself. The courtroom hung on every word as Marcus detailed specific instances of Elena's dependency. There was the time she had insisted on renovating their kitchen while he was trying to secure crucial funding. The expensive car she had demanded when his company was still operating out of a shared workspace. The elaborate dinner parties she had hosted for her book club while he ate takeout at his desk, working late into the night to build something meaningful. Wellington concluded Marcus's direct testimony by establishing the financial picture that seemed to tell the entire story. Marcus's company, TechFlow Analytics, had grown from zero revenue in 2009 to pulling in nearly $12 million annually. Every penny of that success could be traced back to Marcus's vision, his coding abilities, his business development skills, and his relentless work ethic. Elena had been nothing more than an observer to this remarkable achievement, a passenger enjoying the ride without ever contributing to the journey. As Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, his satisfied expression told everyone in the courtroom that he believed the case was essentially over. His legal team exchanged confident glances, already calculating their victory bonus. The spectators whispered among themselves about the clear injustice of Elena potentially receiving any significant portion of assets she had played no role in creating. But Elena Santos, sitting at her modest table with her single attorney, showed no reaction to the devastating testimony. Her hands remained folded, her expression unchanged, as if she were listening to someone else's story rather than having her entire life's contribution dismissed as worthless. She appeared resigned to her fate, a woman who knew she was outgunned and outmatched by superior legal firepower and an ex-husband whose version of events seemed unshakable. Judge Hendricks called for a brief recess, and as the courtroom emptied, Marcus stood near his table accepting congratulations from supporters who were already treating this as a foregone conclusion. Elena remained seated, whispering quietly with her attorney who seemed to be offering consolation rather than strategy. The stage was set for what everyone assumed would be a straightforward case of a successful man rightfully protecting his assets from an undeserving ex-wife who had contributed nothing to their shared success. When court resumed, Marcus Chun returned to the witness stand with renewed vigor, ready to cement his narrative of entrepreneurial triumph against all odds. Judge Hendricks settled into her chair as Wellington prepared to guide Marcus through the detailed timeline of his business success, a story that Marcus had perfected through countless investor presentations and magazine interviews. Marcus began with the humble origins that had become his signature talking point. In 2009, he explained, he was a recent computer science graduate drowning in student loan debt, working a dead-end job at a software company that treated programmers like replaceable parts. His voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who had told this story many times, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. The breakthrough moment came, according to Marcus, during a late-night coding session in their cramped one-bedroom apartment. Elena had been complaining about the noise from his keyboard keeping her awake, demanding that he work somewhere else so she could get her beauty sleep. That night, frustrated by her selfishness, he had stumbled upon the algorithm that would eventually become the foundation of TechFlow Analytics. While his wife slept peacefully, Marcus worked until dawn perfecting the code that would change their lives forever. Wellington prompted Marcus to explain how he had bootstrapped the company despite having no financial resources and a wife who constantly pressured him to spend money they didn't have. Marcus painted a picture of creative resourcefulness, describing how he had convinced 3 college friends to join him as co-founders by offering equity instead of salaries. He had negotiated free office space from a sympathetic landlord, bartered programming services for legal advice, and lived on ramen noodles for months while Elena continued to insist on expensive dinners and designer handbags. The courtroom listened intently as Marcus detailed the company's growth trajectory. By 2011, TechFlow had landed its first major corporate client, a regional bank that needed better data analytics for their loan processing department. Marcus personally coded every feature, debugged every error, and handled all client communications while Elena remained blissfully unaware of the pressure he was under. She would disappear for hours at a time, claiming to visit friends or attend yoga classes, leaving him to handle the mounting responsibilities of a growing business entirely alone. From the gallery, Rebecca Martinez watched Marcus's testimony with obvious satisfaction, her glossy lips curved in a permanent smirk. At 28, she was nearly 15 years younger than Elena, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of aggressive confidence that came from working in pharmaceutical sales. Her designer outfit probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe, and she made sure everyone in the courtroom noticed the difference. Rebecca had been Marcus's girlfriend for 8 months, ever since Elena had finally moved out of their Malibu home, and she clearly viewed these proceedings as a formality before claiming her place as the wife of a successful entrepreneur. Marcus continued his narrative, explaining how Elena had actually hindered the company's progress during crucial growth periods. In 2013, when TechFlow was negotiating its first venture capital funding round, Elena had insisted on taking an expensive vacation to Europe, forcing Marcus to conduct critical investor meetings via video conference from hotel business centers while she sunbathed on Mediterranean beaches. The venture capitalists had been understanding, but Marcus stressed to Judge Hendricks how embarrassing it had been to explain why the company's founder was unavailable for in-person meetings during such a pivotal moment. The pattern continued year after year, according to Marcus. While he worked 18-hour days expanding TechFlow's client base and developing new products, Elena filled her time with frivolous activities that contributed nothing to their household or their future security. She joined expensive fitness classes, took art lessons that she never completed, and spent countless hours shopping online for items they didn't need. Marcus presented receipts showing Elena's spending patterns, thousands of dollars per month on clothes, beauty treatments, and social activities while he reinvested every possible penny back into the business. Elena's attorney, Rebecca Santos, began her cross-examination with what appeared to be routine questions about the timeline of Marcus's success. Her approach seemed almost tentative, as if she were reluctant to challenge such a compelling success story. She asked Marcus to clarify exactly when certain milestones had occurred, requesting specific dates for the company's incorporation, its first major contracts, and its various funding rounds. Marcus answered confidently, his memory apparently crystal clear about every significant moment in TechFlow's development. Santos took careful notes as Marcus explained how he had personally negotiated their lease on the current office building in 2015, how he had hired their first full-time employees in 2016, and how he had secured their largest corporate contract in 2018. Each answer reinforced his image as the sole driving force behind every business decision. Santos then asked about Elena's activities during these crucial periods, and Marcus seemed almost eager to elaborate on his wife's apparent indifference to his professional struggles. During the 2015 office expansion, Elena had been obsessed with redecorating their home, spending weeks selecting fabric samples and paint colors while Marcus negotiated lease terms and managed construction delays. When TechFlow landed their breakthrough government contract in 2017, Elena had been enrolled in a pottery class that met 3 times per week, showing no interest in the achievement that would triple their revenue within 6 months. Judge Hendricks appeared increasingly sympathetic to Marcus's account, occasionally nodding as he described the burden of supporting someone who seemed completely disconnected from the reality of building a successful business. The spectators in the gallery murmured their approval when Marcus mentioned specific instances of Elena's demands coinciding with critical business challenges. Marcus grew more animated as he detailed Elena's complete lack of understanding about entrepreneurship. She had never asked meaningful questions about the business, never offered useful suggestions, and never shown interest in learning about the industry that was providing their increasingly comfortable lifestyle. While other entrepreneurs' spouses became partners in their success, Elena had remained willfully ignorant about everything from basic accounting principles to industry trends that could affect their future. The most damning testimony came when Wellington asked Marcus about Elena's reaction to the company's various successes. When TechFlow had been featured on the cover of Tech Entrepreneur magazine in 2019, Elena's primary concern had been whether the photographer would want to include family photos in the spread. When Marcus had been invited to speak at the Global Analytics Conference, Elena had complained about having to attend the industry dinner because she found technical conversations boring. Even when the company's valuation reached $25 million, Elena's response had been to suggest they buy a vacation home rather than discussing expansion strategies or long-term planning. Santos continued her methodical questioning, asking about the sources of initial funding and the timeline of major business decisions. Her questions seemed almost random, touching on details that appeared irrelevant to the central issue of asset division. She asked about phone records, travel schedules, and banking arrangements with the persistence of someone following a checklist rather than building a coherent argument. Marcus answered every question with unwavering confidence, sometimes appearing annoyed that Santos was wasting the court's time with such mundane details. He explained that he had handled all financial arrangements personally, maintained all business relationships independently, and made every strategic decision without input from Elena because she had never demonstrated any capacity for understanding complex business matters. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus's testimony painted an increasingly stark picture of a marriage between a visionary entrepreneur and a woman who had contributed nothing beyond being an expensive burden. Rebecca Martinez continued smirking from the gallery, occasionally whispering to other spectators about how obvious the outcome should be. Even Elena seemed to shrink further into herself with each devastating revelation about her apparent uselessness. But Santos pressed forward with her seemingly aimless questions, asking about specific dates, locations, and circumstances with the methodical persistence of someone building a foundation. She inquired about Elena's whereabouts during certain business trips, her activities during specific time periods, and her involvement in various household financial decisions. Marcus answered dismissively, clearly viewing these questions as confirmation of Elena's irrelevance to anything important. The day's final revelation came when Santos mentioned that she would be calling financial experts to provide additional context about the company's growth and funding sources. Marcus barely concealed his amusement at this apparent desperation tactic, exchanging confident glances with Wellington as if to say that no amount of expert testimony could change the fundamental facts about who had built TechFlow Analytics. As Judge Hendricks adjourned for the day, Marcus stood with the satisfaction of a man who had just delivered the performance of his career. Rebecca Martinez hurried to his side, her congratulations flowing freely as spectators offered their support for his obvious victory. Meanwhile, Elena gathered her simple belongings quietly, her attorney offering what appeared to be consolation rather than encouragement. The foundation of Marcus's narrative seemed unshakable, built on years of documented success and Elena's apparent complete disconnection from anything resembling productive contribution. Tomorrow would bring Santos's expert witnesses, but nobody in that courtroom believed they could challenge such overwhelming evidence of entrepreneurial achievement versus domestic parasitism. The second day of proceedings began with Elena's attorney Rebecca Santos calling her first witness, a development that seemed to catch Marcus's legal team slightly off guard. They had expected Santos to put Elena on the stand immediately, allowing them to cross-examine her about her lack of contributions to the marriage. Instead, Santos announced she was calling Harold Brennan, the certified public accountant who had handled TechFlow Analytics books during its crucial early years. Brennan shuffled to the witness stand with the measured gait of a man who had spent 40 years examining other people's financial records. His wire-rimmed glasses and rumpled gray suit gave him the appearance of someone more comfortable with spreadsheets than courtrooms, but his reputation for meticulous record-keeping had made him the go-to accountant for dozens of small businesses in the tech sector during the early 2010s. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair as Brennan was sworn in, his confident expression flickering for just a moment. He had expected this divorce to focus on Elena's obvious shortcomings as a wife and partner, not delve into ancient business history that everyone already understood. Wellington leaned over to whisper reassurances, reminding Marcus that Brennan's testimony could only confirm what everyone already knew about TechFlow's success story. Santos began her questioning with routine inquiries about Brennan's professional background and his relationship with TechFlow Analytics. Brennan explained that he had been recommended to Marcus in early 2010 by a mutual business contact, shortly after Marcus had claimed to have his breakthrough moment with the data analytics algorithm. His services had been retained to help navigate the complex financial requirements of establishing a legitimate corporate entity. The questioning seemed mundane at first, with Brennan confirming basic details about TechFlow's incorporation process and early business structure. Santos asked about the company's initial capitalization, its first business bank account, and the procedures Brennan had established for tracking revenue and expenses. Marcus relaxed visibly as the testimony proceeded along predictable lines that supported his narrative of bootstrap entrepreneurship. But then Santos shifted her focus to more specific financial details, asking Brennan to describe the funding sources that had enabled TechFlow to begin operations. Marcus's expression grew more attentive as Brennan pulled out a thick folder of documents that he had apparently brought at Santos's request. The accountant began describing the financial picture with a precision that had made him valuable to small business owners for decades. According to Brennan's records, TechFlow Analytics had received its initial funding through a series of mysterious cash injections that had puzzled him at the time. The first significant deposit, made in March 2010, had been for exactly $500,000, transferred from an account that Marcus had claimed belonged to a silent investor who preferred to remain anonymous. Brennan had questioned Marcus about the source of these funds, particularly given the lack of formal investment documentation. Marcus's confident posture began to shift as Brennan continued reading from his meticulously maintained files. The accountant explained that he had repeatedly asked Marcus to provide proper documentation for these funding sources, as required by standard accounting practices and potential IRS scrutiny. Marcus had assured him that the paperwork was being handled by attorneys and would be provided once certain confidentiality agreements were finalized. Wellington objected that this line of questioning was irrelevant to the divorce proceedings, but Judge Hendricks allowed Santos to continue after she argued that establishing the true sources of marital assets was fundamental to equitable distribution. Marcus's legal team exchanged worried glances as they realized they were entering territory they hadn't prepared for, focusing as they had on Elena's obvious lack of direct business involvement. Santos pressed Brennan for more details about these early financial arrangements, and the accountant's responses grew increasingly uncomfortable for Marcus. Brennan testified that the funding pattern had continued throughout 2010 and 2011, with large deposits appearing in TechFlow's accounts at crucial moments when the company needed capital for expansion, equipment purchases, or payroll. Each time, Marcus had provided vague explanations about investors or loans that would be properly documented later. The most damaging revelation came when Brennan described his growing concern about the irregular nature of these funding sources. Professional accounting standards required clear documentation of all capital sources, particularly for a company that was growing as rapidly as TechFlow. Brennan had warned Marcus that the IRS would eventually require detailed explanations for these large cash injections, especially if the company continued its trajectory toward major success. Rebecca Martinez's satisfied smirk began to waver as she listened to testimony that painted Marcus as evasive about fundamental business details. The spectators who had been so supportive the previous day now murmured with confusion rather than approval. Even Judge Hendricks appeared more focused, taking detailed notes as Brennan described financial irregularities that seemed inconsistent with Marcus's image as a transparent entrepreneur. Marcus's discomfort became more obvious as Santos asked Brennan about specific dates and amounts. The accountant referred to bank statements showing deposits of exactly $150,000 in June 2010, $200,000 in September 2010, and $300,000 in January 2011. Each deposit had occurred precisely when TechFlow needed capital for major business developments, suggesting a level of financial planning and foresight that seemed inconsistent with anonymous investors making spontaneous contributions. Wellington attempted to redirect the testimony during cross-examination, emphasizing that many successful startups rely on private funding sources that prefer to maintain confidentiality. But Brennan's responses undermined this defense, as he explained that truly private investors still require proper legal documentation and formal agreements. The funding pattern for TechFlow had been unlike anything he had encountered in his 4 decades of accounting experience. The courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably as Santos introduced bank records spanning from 2009 to 2012, documents that Brennan confirmed he had maintained as part of his professional obligations. These records painted a picture that contradicted Marcus's narrative of struggling entrepreneur fighting against all odds. Instead, they showed a company with access to significant capital resources that appeared exactly when needed, as if someone with intimate knowledge of the business was providing strategic funding. Marcus's legal team huddled frantically during a brief recess, clearly unprepared for this level of financial scrutiny. They had built their case around Marcus's obvious business success and Elena's apparent lack of contribution, not anticipating that the sources of that success would become relevant. Wellington looked increasingly concerned as he reviewed documents that Santos had apparently been holding in reserve. When testimony resumed, Santos dropped her most significant revelation yet. She announced that her client possessed complete financial records for TechFlow Analytics covering the entire period from 2009 to 2017, including documentation that Marcus's own legal team apparently lacked. These records, she claimed, would provide a complete picture of how TechFlow had actually been funded during its critical growth years. The declaration sent shock waves through the courtroom. Marcus's confident facade cracked visibly as he realized that Elena somehow had access to detailed financial information about his company. Rebecca Martinez sat forward in her seat, her smirk completely gone as she began to understand that this case might not be the straightforward victory she had expected. Judge Hendricks asked Santos to clarify how her client had obtained such comprehensive business records, particularly given Marcus's testimony that Elena had shown no interest in the company's operations. Santos replied that the source and authenticity of these documents would become clear as the case proceeded, but she assured the court that they had been obtained through entirely legal means. Marcus leaned over to whisper urgently with Wellington, his usual composure replaced by obvious anxiety. The narrative of the brilliant entrepreneur supported by anonymous investors was beginning to unravel under methodical questioning that revealed unexplained funding sources and missing documentation. For the first time since the proceedings began, Marcus looked like a man who wasn't entirely certain of victory. Brennan concluded his testimony by confirming that he had eventually been replaced as TechFlow's accountant in late 2012, shortly after he had intensified his requests for proper documentation of the company's funding sources. Marcus had claimed that the company's growth required more specialized financial services, but Brennan admitted he had wondered whether his persistent questions about irregular funding patterns had contributed to the decision to find new representation. As the court adjourned for lunch, the confident predictions of the previous day seemed premature. Marcus's supporters in the gallery whispered among themselves with obvious concern, while Rebecca Martinez looked like someone who was beginning to question whether she had attached herself to the right man. Elena remained as composed as ever, but for the first time since the proceedings began, she appeared to be the person in control of information that others desperately wanted to understand. The foundation of Marcus's success story was showing cracks that threatened to bring down the entire narrative. The afternoon session opened with Rebecca Santos calling Dr. Patricia Kim, a forensic accountant whose reputation for unraveling complex financial schemes had made her a sought-after expert witness in high-stakes litigation. Dr. Kim approached the witness stand with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 20 years following money trails that others had tried desperately to conceal. Her credentials were impeccable: Ph.D. in accounting from Stanford, former FBI financial crimes investigator, and current partner at one of the nation's premier forensic accounting firms. Marcus watched Dr. Kim's approach with growing unease, his earlier confidence replaced by the look of a man who suddenly realized he might be walking into an ambush he hadn't seen coming. Wellington shuffled through his papers frantically, clearly unprepared for this level of financial expertise being brought against what he had assumed was a straightforward asset division case. Dr. Kim settled into the witness chair, and began her testimony by explaining that Santos had retained her services 6 weeks earlier to conduct a comprehensive analysis of all financial records related to TechFlow Analytics and the Chun household finances. Her investigation had involved tracing bank transfers, analyzing corporate structures, and reconstructing the true sources of funding that had enabled Marcus's apparent business success. Santos asked Dr. Kim to begin with her findings regarding the mysterious funding sources that Harold Brennan had described earlier. Dr. Kim opened a thick binder and began reading from her meticulously prepared report, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had testified in dozens of similar cases. The first revelation struck the courtroom like a thunderbolt. The $500,000 deposit that had launched TechFlow Analytics in March 2010 had not come from an anonymous investor, as Marcus had claimed. Dr. Kim's investigation had traced the funds through a series of transfers that ultimately led back to Elena Vasquez Consulting, a limited liability company that had been registered in Elena's maiden name 3 months before Marcus claimed to have his breakthrough coding moment. Marcus's face went ashen as Dr. Kim continued reading from bank records that painted a completely different picture of TechFlow's early success. Elena Vasquez Consulting had generated over $2 million in revenue during 2009 and 2010, providing strategic business consulting services to technology companies throughout the Southwest region. The company's client list included several Fortune 500 corporations that had retained Elena's services for major digital transformation projects. Rebecca Martinez sat frozen in the gallery, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the shock spreading across her features. The woman she had dismissed as a pathetic housewife had apparently been running a multi-million-dollar consulting operation while Marcus was building his reputation as a visionary entrepreneur. The spectators who had been so supportive of Marcus the previous day now whispered among themselves with obvious confusion and growing skepticism. Dr. Kim methodically detailed Elena's business activities during the period when Marcus claimed she was doing nothing but spending his money and complaining about their lifestyle. Elena Vasquez Consulting had maintained offices in 3 different cities, employed a staff of 12 full-time consultants, and held contracts with clients that included 2 major airlines, a regional banking chain, and the state government's technology modernization initiative. The most damaging revelation came when Dr. Kim explained that Elena had deliberately structured her business to operate under her maiden name specifically to avoid any connection to Marcus or TechFlow Analytics. Corporate records showed that Elena had gone to considerable lengths to maintain complete separation between her consulting empire and her husband's startup, even using a different business address and maintaining separate professional networks. Judge Hendricks leaned forward with obvious interest as Dr. Kim detailed the timeline of Elena's strategic funding of Marcus's business ventures. Every major milestone in TechFlow's development had been preceded by large transfers from Elena Vasquez Consulting's accounts. The timing was so precise that it suggested someone with intimate knowledge of TechFlow's operational needs was providing exactly the right amount of capital at exactly the right moments. Marcus tried to maintain his composure, but his hands were visibly shaking as Dr. Kim revealed that Elena's MBA from Wharton had been completed through an executive program that met primarily on weekends and evenings. While Marcus thought his wife was attending yoga classes and book clubs, she had actually been completing graduate coursework in strategic management and financial analysis. Her final thesis project had focused on venture capital funding strategies for technology startups, research that she had apparently applied to supporting her husband's business without his knowledge. Wellington's cross-examination attempts were feeble and ineffective against Dr. Kim's comprehensive documentation. The forensic accountant had anticipated every possible challenge to her findings, providing supporting evidence from multiple independent sources for each conclusion. Bank records, corporate filings, tax documents, and client testimonials all supported the same shocking truth. Elena had been the primary financial force behind Marcus's success from the very beginning. Dr. Kim's testimony revealed that Elena Vasquez Consulting had provided not just funding but strategic guidance for TechFlow's development. Corporate records showed that Elena had filed provisional patents for data analytics algorithms 6 months before Marcus claimed to have developed his breakthrough technology. The patents were registered under her consulting company's name, but the technology had been transferred to TechFlow through a licensing agreement that Marcus had apparently signed without fully understanding its implications. The courtroom atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Dr. Kim revealed the scope of Elena's hidden business empire. Her consulting firm had grown steadily throughout the early 2010s, expanding into cybersecurity consulting and digital transformation services. By 2015, Elena Vasquez Consulting was generating over $8 million annually in revenue, making Elena far wealthier than Marcus even at the height of TechFlow's success. Rebecca Martinez looked like she might be physically ill as Dr. Kim detailed Elena's net worth, which exceeded $15 million in liquid assets alone. The woman she had viewed as competition for Marcus's financial resources was actually worth more than twice what Marcus had claimed as his total business valuation. Martinez began gathering her purse and coat, apparently preparing to leave the courtroom before hearing any more devastating revelations. The most shocking discovery came when Dr. Kim revealed that Elena had been ghostwriting many of Marcus's business proposals and investor presentations. Digital forensics analysis of TechFlow's corporate documents showed that many files had been created on computers registered to Elena Vasquez Consulting before being transferred to TechFlow's systems. Even Marcus's celebrated magazine interviews had been based on talking points and strategic messaging developed by Elena's communications team. Marcus's supporters in the gallery began quietly departing as Dr. Kim's testimony continued, apparently unwilling to witness the complete destruction of everything they had believed about their colleagues' entrepreneurial achievements. Even some members of Marcus's legal team looked stunned by revelations that painted their client as either completely ignorant about his own business or deliberately deceptive about its true origins. Dr. Kim concluded her direct testimony by presenting evidence that Elena had been planning her exit strategy for months before filing for divorce. Corporate records showed that Elena Vasquez Consulting had been systematically unwinding its financial support for TechFlow since early 2023, gradually reducing the transfers and loans that had kept Marcus's company operational. Without Elena's continued financial backing, TechFlow's cash flow had deteriorated significantly, explaining the company's recent struggles that Marcus had attributed to market conditions. Judge Hendricks called a brief recess as the implications of Dr. Kim's testimony settled over the courtroom like a heavy fog. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, no longer the confident entrepreneur who had dominated the previous day's proceedings. His carefully constructed narrative of bootstrap success had been revealed as an elaborate fiction built on his wife's hidden business empire and strategic financial support. Elena remained composed throughout the devastating testimony, occasionally making quiet notes, but showing no satisfaction or vindication at seeing Marcus's reputation destroyed. Her calm demeanor suggested someone who had anticipated every revelation and was prepared for whatever consequences would follow. For the first time since the proceedings began, she looked like the person in control of the situation rather than a victim hoping for mercy. Rebecca Martinez had disappeared entirely during the recess, apparently unable to face the reality that her boyfriend's entire identity as a successful entrepreneur was based on deception and dependence on the woman she had so smugly dismissed. The gallery was now nearly empty except for a few reporters who had begun to realize they were witnessing a story far more complex and shocking than a routine divorce case. As court prepared to reconvene, Marcus's legal team huddled desperately around their client, clearly scrambling to develop a defense strategy for revelations they had never anticipated. The foundation of their case had not merely cracked, but had completely collapsed, leaving them to defend a man whose entire business success had apparently been built on his wife's hidden competence and generous financial support. Rebecca Santos called her next witness with the methodical precision of a prosecutor who knew she had already won the case, but wanted to ensure every detail was thoroughly documented for the record. Dr. Amanda Foster, a digital forensics specialist who had spent 15 years analyzing corporate communications and document creation patterns, approached the witness stand carrying a laptop and several external hard drives containing what would prove to be the final nails in Marcus Chin's credibility coffin. Dr. Foster's credentials were as impressive as Dr. Kim's had been, with a PhD in computer science from MIT and extensive experience testifying in intellectual property theft cases. Her specialty was reconstructing the true authorship and creation timeline of digital documents, a skill that had proven invaluable in cases involving corporate espionage and fraudulent business practices. Marcus watched Dr. Foster's approach with the hollow expression of a man who had already accepted his defeat but was trapped in his chair watching the systematic destruction of his reputation continue. His legal team looked defeated, shuffling through papers with the desperate energy of people trying to find a lifeline that simply didn't exist. Wellington's earlier confidence had been replaced by the grim professionalism of a lawyer who knew he was about to lose spectacularly. Dr. Foster began her testimony by explaining that Santos had retained her services to analyze the digital history of TechFlow Analytics corporate documents, business plans, and strategic presentations. Her investigation had involved examining metadata, file creation patterns, and digital signatures to determine the true authorship of materials that Marcus had claimed as his own intellectual property. The first revelation shattered any remaining doubt about Elena's role in Marcus's apparent business genius. Dr. Foster testified that comprehensive analysis of TechFlow's foundational business documents showed they had been created on computers registered to Elena Vasquez Consulting between 2009 and 2012. The sophisticated financial projections, market analysis reports, and strategic planning documents that had impressed investors and clients had all originated from Elena's business infrastructure. Judge Hendricks took detailed notes as Dr. Foster explained that the famous TechFlow business plan, the document that had secured the company's early venture capital funding, showed clear evidence of being authored by someone with advanced training in strategic business planning and financial modeling. The document's complexity and professional quality were inconsistent with Marcus's background as a computer programmer, but perfectly aligned with the graduate-level business education that Elena had completed at Wharton. More damaging still was Dr. Foster's discovery that Elena had been ghostwriting Marcus's industry conference presentations and magazine interviews for years. Digital forensics revealed that Marcus's celebrated keynote speech at the 2018 Global Analytics Summit had been drafted on Elena's personal laptop 3 weeks before the event. Even Marcus's responses to interview questions from Tech Entrepreneur magazine had been prepared by Elena, with Marcus apparently memorizing her talking points before the interviews. Marcus attempted to interrupt the testimony, claiming that his wife had simply helped him organize his thoughts, but Judge Hendricks firmly instructed him to remain silent while the witness testified. Dr. Foster continued methodically documenting evidence that Marcus had never been the intellectual force behind TechFlow's innovations, but rather a front man reading from scripts prepared by his secretly accomplished wife. The scope of Elena's hidden contributions became even more staggering as Dr. Foster revealed that she had been providing strategic consulting to TechFlow's major clients independently of Marcus's knowledge. Corporate emails recovered from Elena Vasquez Consulting's servers showed that she had been the primary contact for troubleshooting technical issues, developing custom solutions, and managing client relationships that Marcus believed he was handling personally. Dr. Foster's most devastating revelation concerned Marcus's educational background, which he had claimed as entirely self-funded despite coming from a working-class family with limited resources. Financial records showed that Elena had paid Marcus's student loans, graduate school tuition, and living expenses throughout his time at USC. The total financial support exceeded $400,000, making Marcus's computer science degree and MBA essentially gifts from his future wife. The courtroom fell completely silent as Dr. Foster detailed evidence that Elena had been supporting Marcus financially since before their marriage. Bank records showed that Elena had been transferring money to Marcus's personal accounts as early as 2007, 2 years before they were married and 3 years before Marcus claimed to have started TechFlow. The relationship had never been between equals, but between a successful businesswoman and a man who had been completely dependent on her resources from the beginning. Wellington made a desperate objection, arguing that ancient financial arrangements between spouses were irrelevant to current asset division. But Judge Hendricks overruled him after Santos argued that understanding the true source of all marital assets was fundamental to equitable distribution. The judge appeared increasingly interested in the systematic deception that was being revealed through Dr. Foster's meticulous documentation. Dr. Foster then delivered what may have been the most personally humiliating revelation for Marcus. His current girlfriend, Rebecca Martinez, was living in an apartment that Elena owned through one of her real estate investment companies. The lease agreement showed that Rebecca had been paying rent to Elena for the past 8 months, apparently without realizing that her landlord was the woman she had been smugly dismissing as a pathetic housewife. The implications of this discovery rippled through the courtroom as people realized that Elena had been aware of Marcus's affair from the beginning and had been collecting rent money from his mistress while maintaining her cover as an oblivious spouse. Rebecca Martinez had unknowingly been funding the woman whose husband she was trying to steal, a level of irony that seemed almost too dramatic to be believable. Dr. Foster's testimony revealed that Elena owned 17 different properties throughout the region, including the Malibu home that Marcus considered his primary residence. Property records showed that Elena had purchased the house using funds from her consulting business 2 years before their marriage, then added Marcus's name to the deed as a wedding gift. Marcus had been living in his wife's house while publicly claiming that he had provided her with a luxurious lifestyle through his entrepreneurial success. The systematic destruction of Marcus's credibility continued as Dr. Foster presented evidence that Elena had been the primary decision-maker for every major TechFlow business strategy. Email records showed that Marcus had routinely forwarded important business communications to Elena for guidance, then implemented her recommendations without acknowledging her input to colleagues or clients. Even TechFlow's hiring decisions had been based on Elena's analysis of candidate qualifications and market needs. Marcus's attempts to object or clarify were repeatedly overruled as Dr. Foster methodically documented years of deception and dependence. The successful entrepreneur persona that Marcus had cultivated was revealed as an elaborate performance, with Elena serving as the behind-the-scenes strategist, financier, and intellectual force that had made his apparent success possible. Judge Hendricks asked Dr. Foster to clarify the extent of Elena's involvement in TechFlow's operations, and the specialist's response was devastating. Based on digital forensics evidence, Elena had been the de facto chief executive of TechFlow Analytics while allowing Marcus to serve as the public face of the company. Every major decision, from personnel hiring to strategic planning to financial management, had been influenced or directly controlled by Elena through her consulting company's resources. The final revelation of Dr. Foster's testimony concerned Marcus's post-separation financial situation. Corporate records showed that TechFlow had been operating at a significant loss since Elena had begun withdrawing her financial support in early 2023. Without Elena's continued funding and strategic guidance, the company that Marcus claimed as his greatest achievement was approaching bankruptcy. The successful entrepreneur was revealed to be entirely dependent on his estranged wife's continued generosity for basic business survival. As Dr. Foster concluded her testimony, Marcus sat slumped in his chair like a man who had watched his entire identity systematically destroyed by undeniable evidence. The confident tech mogul who had entered the courtroom 2 days earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he might never recover from the public humiliation of having his complete dependence and deception exposed in such devastating detail. Elena remained as composed as ever throughout the testimony, but for the first time since the proceedings had begun, she appeared to be the person with all the power in the room. Her calm demeanor suggested someone who had been patiently waiting for the truth to emerge, knowing that every aspect of Marcus's success story would eventually be revealed as fiction built on her hidden competence and extraordinary generosity. The courtroom was now nearly empty except for court officials and a handful of reporters who had realized they were witnessing one of the most spectacular reversals in recent legal history. Marcus's supporters had all departed, apparently unable to face the reality that their successful colleague had been living an elaborate lie for over a decade. Judge Patricia Hendricks returned to her bench the following morning with the gravity of someone who had spent the evening reviewing one of the most complex and shocking cases of her 30-year career. The courtroom was packed with reporters and legal observers who had heard rumors about the extraordinary revelations that had unfolded over the previous 2 days. Marcus Chin sat at his table, looking like a man who had aged a decade in 48 hours, his expensive suit now seeming more like a costume than the uniform of a successful entrepreneur. Elena Vasquez had undergone a remarkable transformation overnight. Gone was the modest department store dress and submissive posture. She now wore a tailored business suit that suggested both competence and authority, her posture straight and confident as she sat beside Rebecca Santos. For the first time since the proceedings had begun, Elena looked like exactly what the evidence had revealed her to be. A successful businesswoman who had been generous enough to support a man who had repaid her kindness with public humiliation and betrayal. Judge Hendricks began her ruling by acknowledging that this case had evolved far beyond a typical divorce proceeding into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about entrepreneurship, marriage, and the nature of business success. She noted that the evidence presented had been so comprehensive and shocking that it had forced her to reconsider basic principles about how courts should approach asset division when one spouse had been systematically deceived about the other's contributions to their shared success. The judge's first ruling addressed the central question of TechFlow Analytics ownership and control. Based on the overwhelming evidence that Elena had provided the majority of funding, strategic guidance, and intellectual property that had made the company successful, Judge Hendricks awarded Elena a 75% controlling stake in TechFlow Analytics. Marcus would retain a 25% share, which the judge noted was more generous than the evidence might have supported, but reflected her desire to avoid completely destroying his ability to earn a living. Marcus's face went completely white as he realized that the company he had considered his greatest achievement was now controlled by the woman he had publicly dismissed as a burden. Judge Hendricks continued by explaining that Elena would have full authority to make strategic decisions about TechFlow's future operations, including personnel changes, client relationships, and financial management. Marcus would serve in a subordinate role under Elena's leadership, a reversal that seemed almost too dramatic to be real. The financial arrangements were even more devastating for Marcus's remaining dignity. Judge Hendricks ordered him to pay Elena monthly alimony of $15,000, acknowledging that Elena had been the primary breadwinner throughout their marriage despite Marcus's public claims to the contrary. The judge noted the particular irony that Marcus would now be financially dependent on Elena in exactly the same way that he had falsely claimed she had been dependent on him. Rebecca Martinez had returned to the courtroom for the final ruling, apparently unable to resist witnessing the conclusion of the case despite her humiliation from the previous day. She sat in the back row wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap, clearly hoping to avoid recognition. Her attempts at anonymity failed when Judge Hendricks specifically addressed the issue of her tenancy in Elena's apartment building. The judge ruled that Rebecca's lease would be terminated immediately, as Elena had every right to decide who could live in property she owned. Judge Hendricks noted with barely concealed amusement that Rebecca had been unknowingly paying rent to Elena for 8 months while conducting an affair with Elena's husband, a situation that demonstrated Elena's remarkable forbearance and strategic thinking. Rebecca gathered her belongings and fled the courtroom before the ruling was complete, apparently unable to face any additional humiliation. Judge Hendricks then addressed the broader implications of the case, noting that Elena's decision to support Marcus's career while building her own business empire in secret represented a level of generosity that had been repaid with public betrayal and systematic efforts to minimize her contributions. The judge observed that Elena could have destroyed Marcus's reputation years earlier, but had chosen instead to quietly enable his success until his behavior became so egregious that legal action became necessary. The most stunning revelation came when Judge Hendricks announced that Elena's business empire extended far beyond what had been revealed during testimony. Additional financial records showed that Elena Vasquez Consulting had grown into a network of 7 different companies operating across multiple industries, with combined annual revenues exceeding $50 million. Elena was not merely wealthy, but was actually one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the region, despite maintaining such a low profile that most people had never heard of her. Marcus's former colleagues and investors, many of whom had attended the early proceedings to support him, now faced the embarrassing reality that they had been working with Elena's money and strategic guidance while believing they were partnering with Marcus's genius. Several venture capital firms had already begun reaching out to Elena directly, recognizing that she represented the true business acumen they had thought they were investing in when they funded TechFlow. The judge's ruling included a requirement that Marcus publicly acknowledge Elena's contributions to TechFlow's success through a formal statement to be published in the business publications that had previously featured his success story. Marcus would be required to admit that Elena had provided the majority of funding, strategic planning, and intellectual property that had made TechFlow successful, correcting the public record that had given him sole credit for achievements that were primarily hers. Elena was also awarded the Malibu house, the vacation properties, and the majority of other real estate holdings, which Judge Hendricks noted had been purchased primarily with Elena's money despite being titled in both names. Marcus would be permitted to remain in the guest house of the Malibu property until he could arrange alternative housing, an arrangement that emphasized his new status as the dependent party in their relationship. As the formal proceedings concluded, Elena spoke publicly for the first time since the case began. Her statement was brief but powerful, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had finally been recognized for her true contributions. She thanked Judge Hendricks for carefully considering all evidence and expressed hope that the case would encourage other women to be transparent about their business achievements rather than hiding them to protect their spouses' egos. Elena also announced that she would be establishing the Vasquez Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs, a nonprofit organization designed to provide funding and mentorship for women starting their own businesses. The foundation would be funded with $10 million from Elena's personal assets, demonstrating her commitment to supporting other women who faced the challenges she had overcome while building her business empire in secret. The immediate aftermath of the ruling was swift and merciless for Marcus's remaining pretensions. TechFlow's employees, clients, and investors all learned the truth about the company's real leadership and funding sources. Several major clients immediately requested meetings with Elena to ensure continuity of service, recognizing that she represented the true strategic minds behind the solutions they had valued. Marcus found himself marginalized within his own company, reduced to a junior role reporting to the woman he had spent years dismissing as irrelevant. Rebecca Martinez's relationship with Marcus ended within days of the ruling, as she apparently decided that a man living in a guest house and paying alimony to his ex-wife was not the successful entrepreneur she thought she had captured. Her rapid departure provided additional confirmation that she had been attracted to Marcus's apparent wealth and status rather than any genuine personal connection. Elena's strategic decision to collect rent from her husband's mistress was revealed as a masterpiece of long-term planning and emotional intelligence. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, the transformation of both parties was complete and dramatic. Elena had emerged as one of the most respected business leaders in the region, with her companies expanding rapidly as clients and investors recognized the quality of leadership they had unknowingly been working with for years. She was featured on the cover of Businesswoman magazine as Entrepreneur of the Year, with the accompanying article detailing her remarkable ability to build a business empire while maintaining such discretion that even her husband had been unaware of her success. Elena's public speaking engagements drew standing room-only crowds of aspiring entrepreneurs who wanted to understand how she had managed to achieve such extraordinary success while navigating the complexities of supporting a spouse who had systematically taken credit for her achievements. Her story became a case study in business schools across the country, demonstrating both exceptional strategic thinking and remarkable personal restraint in the face of ongoing betrayal. Marcus's fall from grace was equally dramatic, but in the opposite direction. TechFlow Analytics, now operating under Elena's direct leadership, had terminated his employment after he repeatedly challenged her authority and attempted to undermine her strategic decisions. He was currently working as a junior programmer at a small software company, earning less in a year than Elena had previously transferred to his accounts in a typical month. The business community's treatment of Marcus served as a warning to others who might be tempted to take credit for achievements that belonged to their spouses or partners. Former colleagues who had once sought his advice now avoided him entirely, recognizing that his apparent business acumen had been borrowed rather than developed. The networking events and industry conferences that had once welcomed him as a successful entrepreneur now viewed him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of claiming others' accomplishments. Elena's mentorship of other women entrepreneurs had become one of her most fulfilling activities, as she used her experience to help other successful women avoid the trap of hiding their achievements to protect their partners' egos. The Vasquez Foundation had already provided seed funding to dozens of women-owned startups, with Elena personally reviewing every application to ensure that the recipients understood the importance of claiming credit for their own successes. The final vindication came when Elena was invited to deliver the keynote address at the same Global Analytics Conference, where Marcus had once been the featured speaker using her Ghostrin presentation. Elena's speech, titled Breaking the Silence of Success, received multiple standing ovations as she encouraged the audience to recognize and celebrate the contributions of all team members, regardless of gender or public visibility. The irony of Elena speaking from the same podium where Marcus had once claimed sole credit for her work was not lost on anyone in attendance. As this remarkable story of hidden strength and ultimate justice comes to a close, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Elena's incredible journey from secret supporter to recognized leader. Have you ever encountered situations where someone was taking credit for work that wasn't entirely their own? Or do you know women who have been the quiet force behind someone else's apparent success? Share your experiences in the comments. And if this story of perseverance and ultimate vindication resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of justice served and truth revealed. Elena's transformation from dismissed housewife to celebrated entrepreneur proves that the truth has a way of emerging, no matter how carefully it might be hidden.